Welcome back, DPReview TV viewers. It is Chris Nichols here, and as you can see, we are not in Calgary. We're in New York City next to the beautiful Brooklyn Bridge. Leica has flown us out here to take a look at a new piece of camera gear, but we don't know what it is. We're going to find that out tomorrow, but for tonight, it rained in New York City at night. It just doesn't get any better. I just wish I had a brand new Leica to play with on a night like this. Up bright and early, we're in the heart of Wall Street. I've never been to this part of New York City before. It's pretty cool. And we're gonna go meet Leica right now, head into the building and find out what we're gonna play with today. So look at that, the rumor sites were true. I've got myself a brand new Leica M11 to play with here in New York City. Now, I do want to mention this is a pre-production camera. We don't have final firmware, but Leica's being very generous, letting us shoot sample galleries and stuff. That's gonna be a lot of fun. They have provided me with the Summilux 1.4 35mm, a beautiful lens. They've heard how much I love the 35mm focal length.
They sent one 35mm 1.8, the new S lens. It's light and...
No, I hate 35. But you know what? Shooting in the streets of New York City with a 35mm on a Leica is pretty iconic, so I'm gonna deal. We only have a day left here in New York City, so we're just gonna get shooting, talk about our first impressions, but we were gonna take this back home with us as well, and then really evaluate the files and talk about that further. Now, at first glance, when you look at the M11, it looks a lot like an M10. In fact, we're counting on that fact as we wander around the streets of New York City with an embargoed camera. But there's a very interesting design choice that I want to talk about here. It doesn't really translate through video, but they've actually got different metal construction for both the chrome version and the black version of this camera. Now, the chrome version is a solid brass body. I like the heavy weight. It's very reminiscent of an M10, but the more professional street photographer's black camera is actually a new aluminum construction, and it's significantly lighter, about 20% less. It still does have a nice solid feel, and I'm really liking it for just walking around, keeps things nice and light, but overall, a very interesting choice that the color will determine the metal construction. Now, there's a unique thing here about the M11 that's different from the previous M10. This camera can now use the multi-segment metering while you're using the rangefinder. Now, in order to do that, it clicks open the shutter when you turn the camera on, and it's just reading light off the sensor, but I'm still shooting through the rangefinder. Do make note, though, that on this camera, and again, I don't know if firmware is going to fix this, but there's a fair amount of delay. So I'm going to click it on now. You ready? And go. And now the camera's ready to shoot. Now, that is a significant amount of time, especially when you're trying to shoot quickly on the street. So this is what I'm going to try to do today. I'm just going to test out this camera, leaving it on the whole time, letting it go into standby mode. Now, as much as the M11 is designed to very much feel like an M10 camera and keep things familiar, we do have a very significant design change, and that's on the bottom of the camera here. No longer do we have that classy removable base plate that covers your battery and SD card access. This now actually looks a lot more like a Q2, for example, where you have a switch release for your battery. Click that, pop that out. There's our new and improved battery we talked about with its own incorporated base plate, and that now covers your SD card slot as well. Now, I do like this system. I like the change. It's easier to change the battery and access things, but we do still have some problems here. The old base plate system, it was a pain because if you had a quick release plate on, you had to take that off, then unlock the base plate. Here, you'd think that wouldn't be an issue. The problem is you can see right here that our tripod thread is right next to the release switch here for the battery. So if I have a tripod plate on here, I still can't open anything up. So that's unfortunate. But another interesting feature here, that SD card slot is a UHS 2 card slot, and we do have now a USB-C port on the side. Now, this USB-C port adds a lot of connectivity and convenience for us now. Now, If you're an Apple user, you're lucky because they provide you a USB-C to Lightning cable, and you can actually connect the camera directly to your phone, download photos, use their new version of the Leica Photos app. So that's nice. For Android users, though, you're still kind of out of luck. But I can still use this USB-C port to charge the camera. And this is really cool. It's actually very flexible. I mean, you can use power banks to try to charge the battery up or help you extend the battery life as you're shooting the camera tethered. I can also charge off of wall chargers. And Leica hasn't quite given us exact numbers on what the wattage is so that you can power the camera and charge at the same time, but with a strong enough charger, that is absolutely a possibility. Either way, this modernizes the camera in a very important way. Now, there are some nice improvements when it comes to composing your image. Now, we've got the same rangefinder as the Leica M10, but the back panel is much improved. It's a fixed LCD, but it's now 2.3 million dots, touch screen, of course, and we also have a new menu system that's kind of like the Q2. So when you first hit the menu, you do get your quick options. You can touch screen and select them, which is really nice. And then if you want to go into the menu, hit the menu button again, and you've got all your options there. You don't have touchscreen interface in the actual menu itself. That seems like an oversight, but otherwise, it's very easy to navigate. Now, they've also launched a brand new VisoFlex EVF right alongside the M11. Now, we haven't had a chance to play with one, but it looks promising. I mean, new design, 3.68 million dots, and does fully tilt, and apparently it is still reverse compatible with the M10 as well. Now, one of my biggest complaints on the Leica M10 was this ISO dial at the top left. I've never liked it. I mean, it's hard to press up, and when you do, you've got a pretty small dial to actually manipulate. So I've never enjoyed that. I've complained about it a lot, but the M11 takes care of that because we now have 3 custom function buttons. One up here next to my on-off switch, and one back here just above the menu. But the back dial now also has a press-in function, which is another function button. And this is what I love about it. It's the same simple system that Leica's used. Hold down a button just for a few seconds, and then it lets you customize. They've now expanded what you can customize these buttons to. That's great. And I can now use the back dial without pressing as, for example, exposure compensation. And then when I press it in, I get ISO. And this is great because I can manipulate my auto ISO from here or set an ISO that I want. And that means I never have to touch this dial on the left again. That makes me very happy. And if you like this ISO dial on the left, well, then you could just use that press-in function for any other number of custom functions. So normally having a really high-res back panel isn't that big a deal for me because I'll use the EVF to evaluate whether, there's motion blur, everything's sharp, everything's in focus, but we don't have an EVF on this camera, so I'm actually really appreciating that we do have this higher res LCD. I'm able to zoom in, punch in, and just make sure that I don't have any problems, which is especially important when you have such a high resolution sensor in a camera like this. We've got the exact same shutters you'll find in the M10, which is a good thing. I mean, it's nice and quiet, stable shooting, but we do also have an electronic shutter here. Rolling shutter is still absolutely prevalent though, keep that in mind, but if you wanted to shoot on a tripod or something, you're looking for absolute stability, you do have that as an option, and it will go up to 16,000th of a second if you want to shoot wide open lenses in really bright sunlight without ND filters, but still, I think I would largely stick to the mechanical shutter on this one. Look at that, we got a freshly raked pile of leaves left completely unattended. Bold move, man, just asking for somebody to jump in there. I'm not gonna do it, I mean, we're Canadian, right? And one feature that I really do appreciate on the Leica M11 is having 64 gigs of internal memory. That's quite significant. You could happily just shoot that, not even bring a memory card with you. That would work just fine. It's also nice to have that safety blanket in case you do fill up your memory card and you don't have any extras, then you can just overflow into the internal memory. Or if you're shooting a professional event and just having everything backed up in duplicate so you have that extra redundancy, that could be really nice as well. This is a feature I wish we had on a lot of other modern cameras. It would have been really handy for Jordan because, case study, he leaves his memory card for the video camera at the hotel room, and then rather than just be able to comfortably shoot on internal memory, we have to go back and get it before we can do our show. Now, the M11 shoots about 4.5 frames per second in its high-speed continuous mode, and if you're just shooting DNGs, you'll get about 14 to 15 shots before the buffer taps out. So about 3 seconds roughly of actual shooting speed. Not bad. I mean, this is pretty much what we expect out of these rangefinders. The only thing I will say is I do find if I'm in single shooting mode, there's a little bit of delay from taking one photo to taking another one. So I often find that I just leave these cameras in low-speed continuous and just shoot like that for even single shots. I don't know, Jordan says there's something interesting in the background, so I guess it's enough talking points. We should probably just go shoot, get some samples, and then start evaluating them. So let's, go see what we can see. Oh, Jordan, look, this giant boat. Did you see that? It's beautiful. Okay, so we're back in Calgary. We had a great trip to New York City, but it's nice to be home. And we've had a chance to look at some of the files. And again, remember, this is a pre-production camera. We're not able to do any lab tests on these files, but we can talk about some of our findings. The first thing I want to mention, though, is the fact that this is a 60 megapixel backside illuminated CMOS sensor really then makes us feel, is this the same sensor or a very similar sensor to what you'd find in the Sony a7R IV, the Sigma FPL? I mean, there are 60 megapixel full frame sensors out there. And one thing I will say that is nice about having a backside illuminated CMOS sensor is this makes the M11 a very contemporary camera as far as image quality goes. We've done quite a bit of testing. We shot a lot of low light stuff in New York. We did some low light tests here as well. We shot with strobes to maximize resolution, and we do definitely have some findings. So let's talk about that. Now, Leica is also stating that their 60 megapixel BSI CMOS sensor is a dual gain sensor, which lines up with the other 60 megapixel full frame sensors also being dual gain, but there's a significant difference. Other manufacturers like Sony and Sigma, their base ISO starts at 100, and the second ISO for their dual gain sensor is usually 320. Leica instead, though, is having a base ISO of 64, and from what we've tested, we think that the second ISO is 200. Now, that lines up with the other manufacturers, but of course at a different range. And this is interesting because this normally has implications for dynamic range. But Leica is stating that their sensor at 60 megapixels delivers 14 stops of DR, and this would be very similar to what we're seeing out of other manufacturers. So we really want to test this further once we get a full production camera. But regardless, I think the big takeaway is, as far as low light performance goes in dynamic range, it's very similar to the other manufacturers with their 60 megapixel sensors. Now, if you're finding that 60 megapixel RAW files are too big to work with, or you just don't need that resolution, that is a legitimate concern, and Leica does give you an option to drop the resolution. They're just using pixel binning to do that, and you can go down to 36 megapixel RAWs or 18 megapixel RAWs. And of course, you can do that with your JPEGs as well. In fact, you have quite a bit of flexibility here. I mean, I could do 60 megapixel DNGs, but then 18 megapixel JPEGs, for example, or I could even reverse that. I don't know why you would, but you could. So you could have 18 megapixel DNG files with 60 megapixel JPEGs if you want. And you can, again, split those however you want amongst the external and internal memory. Now, Leica is also claiming that if you do shoot at lower resolutions, you actually get a dynamic range benefit. Up to 15 stops is possible, and you also get a better low light performance benefit. Now, as far as dynamic range improving, again, that's something we have to wait to test. But when it comes to low light performance, I mean, yes, at a per pixel level, when you drop the resolution, you do get better low light performance. However, when you actually look at them at the same viewing size, again, the low light performance is basically the same. So we're not really too concerned about that. But I do want to see if there's dynamic range benefit dropping the resolution. So regardless, we have an M series camera now with a 60 megapixel sensor, great dynamic range and low light performance no matter how you look at it. And when you shoot this camera with flashes or on a tripod, you can really maximize that sharpness and it looks great. The only thing I want you guys to keep in mind though is we don't often shoot Leica M cameras with flashes on a tripod, right? A lot of it's just going to be street photography, handheld, walking around, and these cameras don't have image stabilization. The lenses don't have image stabilization. And as good as the shutters are, I still find that unless I'm shooting really fast shutter speeds and trying to be as stable as possible, a lot of my shots weren't getting the full benefit of those 60 megapixels because of a little bit of motion blur, handheld cameras when you're shooting in low light situations. As well, lens choice, because of this high resolution sensor, will play a part as well. We don't have a complete list, but talking with Leica, generally speaking, if you're using their modern spherical lenses, the apochromatic formulas, you can maximize the resolution inherent in the sensor. But if you're using older lenses or maybe third-party stuff, you're not necessarily going to get the full benefits of the 60 megapixel sensors. And of course, this isn't a Leica thing. This is something we see across many manufacturers with all of their different lenses. In the end, though, the M11 is just their most powerful rangefinder to date. And with all the new conveniences, honestly, they're most enjoyable to use. I can't help but feel that, if I bought an M10R recently, I might feel burned because I really think this is the one to wait for. Having the better LCD panel resolution is great. I loved having the fact that I could customize that push button on the dial and not have to rely on that ISO thing. That was, for me, a big part of the frustration. I don't miss the removable bottom panel at all. I think this is a way better design. The USB charging makes things so much more convenient, and that battery, well, we were going to talk about that, right? I tested the camera all day, shot about 600 photos leaving the camera on. I didn't turn it off, just left it in standby mode, and I was still only at 50% loss. I mean, that's excellent to have. So Overall, I think the M11, this is a great camera to look for if you are in the market for it. Now, do please leave your comments below. Check out our pre-production sample gallery. It's on dpreview.com. Links in the description below. Let us know what you think about this camera, and please do like and subscribe to the channel. We always appreciate you joining us for these videos. We'll see you all shortly on another episode of DPReview TV.